Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 83rd level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined, as always, by the level 99 elf medic, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing this lovely, lovely Monday evening? It's President's Day in the States. It's Family Day here in Canada. It's a holiday for both of us, even though I work today. But you know, that's just how we roll, man. How you doing?
I'm glad to celebrate the presidents. Any reason to not work? Thank you, presidents. All presidents out there, even you, the dumb ones, the ineffective ones, the ones less than a year term. We remember you on this day as we take this work day off. Actually, I'm pretty tired because today I had to go to the visa office in
Oh,
China, here in the city. And there's a long line now because they just reopened like the offices like
yeah.
around here. So I got there at 6 in the morning and like stood up for like 5 hours to, wait in line. It's like the DMV on steroids,
That's
basically.
that sounds very annoying, but also very relatable because when I had to get my passport renewed, it was the same
Mhm.
thing. Because in Canada, like it's
Mm.
kind of ridiculous to go get your passport renewed right now because the lines are just
Yeah,
huge. Like people are camping out overnight, like outside the
it's
passport
crazy.
office to be able to make sure that they're actually able to get in there before they close at 5 p.m. that day. Um,
Oh
and get
man.
their passport renewed. So it's a whole thing here, Garret.
But I got situated. I got back, so everything's good. So
Nice, nice.
yeah.
Well, we're gonna, of course, celebrate the release of Theatrhythm Final Bar Line, everyone's favorite Final Fantasy
Yay.
game this week. And well, of course,
Sure.
I'm very excited about it. I've talked about it on the show before.
Mhm.
It's the Final Fantasy rhythm game for folks that are they're uninsured. So we're gonna be talking about music tonight, which I think is always super fun. We haven't talked about music since the second episode of the show. So you can actually go back and listen to that, like Garret did, to prepare for tonight's show
I
if you want
did.
to.
Actually, it was pretty funny, Ryan. I listened to it like all the way through because, I had time this morning. We were talking about, oh man, what Scarlet Nexus. We
Yeah.
were talking about that game and that demo.
The,
I'm like, oh my gosh,
That
it
was
was such
so
a
long
long
ago.
time
The
ago.
best part about it is, Garret, we have a question about Scarlet Nexus tonight later in the show
Oh
to
my
kind of cap
goodness.
things off and bring it full
Just
circle.
closes the loop,
Just
man.
closing the loop, man.
Crazy.
Well, anyways, before we get into all that, we should, of course, clear the dungeon of these pesky mobs so we can get to that raid boss as quickly as possible. So, folks at home, if you want to support the show, there's a number of awesome ways to do that. If you're watching the live stream right now, we're at youtube.com/carpoolgaming, or if you're watching the video on demand later, don't forget to like the video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and then ding, 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 ring that notification bell to be notified whenever we go live with a new live stream or whenever we put up a new video, like all these Last of Us reactions that we've been doing. I know Matt's actually been doing an amazing job putting those together, and they actually just did that tonight with a big crew. So you're gonna want, if you're watching The Last of Us and if you want to hear some other people talking about it, if you want to get in the conversation, head on over to the YouTubes, go watch that as well. And then also, if you're listening on audio feeds, don't forget to subscribe to us there if you haven't subscribed already. And then rate us if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And last but not least, if you want some of our shows a little bit early or some exclusive content, like an episode of the Yumi Capri podcast that I recorded with Sean last week, as well as Seth, which went into some pretty serious territory, at least about my life anyways. You can head out over to Patreon, patreon.com/carpoolgaming, throw a little tip in the little tip
Spoilers.
jar, and out comes content. All right, Garret, without further ado,
Mhm.
it is time to read from the sacred texts because
Let's do it.
we got to talk about soundtracks. So first off, I love music. I mean, people who have been listening to me
I can tell.
podcast for a long time know that, I always was very passionate about music, from a very young age. My parents were both really into music, and my brothers were all into music, and so was I. I just kind of got dragged along with them. I used to
Did you
play,
play anything?
I played
Um,
the drums, I played the piano.
mm,
Um,
nice.
I played I went and played some gigs with the drums, but I'm nowhere near the
Gigs.
musician that my brother is. Actually, my older brother Kyle
Mm,
is quite the guitarist, and he's played a whole
got
bunch
it.
of fancy shows and stuff like that. So, well, and I've always had this great thing with music. So, of course, one of the big reasons why I got so sucked into video games growing up, and then also one of the reasons why video games have always continued to be part of my life is because the music in video games is really excellent, especially in RPGs. So we did this episode. Our second episode had to be about soundtracks, and we composed our like top 10 list, which we'll go over as to like our top 10 soundtracks of all time. And then tonight we're gonna add 10 more to the list and talk about all that good stuff. But before I get into that, Garrett, I have a question for you. A question that
Yes.
I am remiss I don't remember us talking about on the first episode or first time we did this, but correct me if we did, Garrett. But I mean, it actually is good for us to talk about again because we do have a lot of new listeners to the show. And that is, what kind of music do you like to listen to outside of games, Garrett? Because I feel like, the way music works is that there's no right or wrong answer as to what's the best and what's the worst. It's all about, your internal biases and what type of music stylings you like and what you don't like. And that plays into, okay, what's going to be our favorite, RPG album. This is going to play into that a little bit. So I want to know, Garrett, what kind of music you listen to outside of video games? Because I think that's going to play a little bit into your choices here.
Yeah, sure. First off, before I get into like my music genres, I actually played an instrument as well.
Oh,
I did. Yeah. I played the clarinet from sixth grade, which I was 11 years old, so 11 till I was 19. So yeah, until I did the marching band in high school, did the marching band in college, did a regular band or whatever in high school as well. Music has been a huge part of my life. I know how to read music. I know how to get into it. At least with the clarinet.
mhm.
I know it's like different for everything else. But yeah, very much enjoy music and listening to it all the time. And I love my music in games as well, especially RPGs. The kind of genre I listen to, I think it's pretty predictable for me. It's like kind of like it's like modern. Like it could be modern rock, but it can also just be like just contemporary in general. Just
Okay.
like the bands I'm thinking of right now that I just listen through on repeat is like Tame Impala, Gorillaz, Red Hot Chili Peppers is a big one for me. Linkin Park was like my jam back in the day,
Yep.
for
I
sure.
know that feeling.
Um, I do like some orchestral pieces as well. And we just go through playlists of those for
Mhm.
sure.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm pretty predictable guy. What I do with music is like I actually genuinely like to like listen through an album
Mhm.
just to make sure I get the whole message from the artist, and then probably like after 3 or 4 times, I'm just like, okay, let me pick out the songs that I kind of really like and just like hop it over to my playlist on Spotify, and I'm pretty much good to go. And then sometimes if I feel like, oh, I haven't heard of this band in a while, I would just go back to their Spotify playlist, kind of like go through some of their albums. But yeah, that's pretty. Churches is a big one for me too. Phoenix. I think yeah, Phoenix is a big one. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Nice, nice. I, th- I,
Hmm.
feel, I feel like we get along at least a little bit, not just in the realm of RPGs, but in music. I mean, I don't feel like we listen to a lot of the same bands, but I feel like we listen to very similar styles of music, anyways, which I think
Oh, nice.
helps
Cool.
complement things a little bit. Now, I'm also kind of more all over the place because I listened to a lot of other stuff, and it was definitely not like that. Because when I was
Hmm.
first really getting into music in high school, I was really much just into just rock music, metal music, just anything like that. Like especially new metal, like during the late '90s, early 2000s. Like I was
Nice.
the Linkin Park person. I was the Korn person. I was the person who was into Limp Bizkit. I was that guy who was into all that stuff. And because I had like this giant collections of CDs at home, like at one point I owned like 500 CDs because I
Oh
listened
goodness.
to so much music. But it was all rock music because I just didn't really branch out a whole lot when it came to a lot of music,
Hmm.
especially because like I like I felt myself becoming a little bit of a music snob in a way where like electronic music would come on or something like that, and I'd kind of like turn my nose up to it and be like, no thank you, no thank you, I don't want any part of that because it doesn't have any like heavy guitars in it and stuff like that. So but as I've gotten older, I really started to branch out a lot. Like towards the end of high school, I was really getting into a lot of rap and hip hop on top
Cool.
of rock, but a lot of that just had to do with listening to a lot of rap rock, which was popular at the time, and then getting into, and then that kind of being the gateway into, listening to rap and hip hop on top of that. And I listened to a lot of that during my college years. But then after that, video game soundtracks really kind of got me into electronic music and dance music and EDM, and a lot of other different styles of music. But I kind of just listen to anything at this point. Like I like pop music. I like a lot of, electronic music. And of course still love a lot of rock music as well. Some of my all-time favorite bands, of course, are, bands like Nirvana or Lacuna Coil or Muse or a bunch of other, rock bands. Rage Against the Machine, another one of my favorites.
There we go.
Yeah. So I do like a lot of, rock stuff. That's still probably still my favorite stuff, but I don't know. There's a lot of electronic stuff I like. And especially now, I just find myself, I'm not listening to as much music with vocals anymore, because a lot of times the times that I am listening to music is usually when I'm working. And the last thing I want is music with vocals to do that, which is why a lot of times what ends up actually happening is, outside of playing games, a lot of times I end up actually listening to game soundtracks because they don't have vocals, and because I find that game music is actually pretty good to work along with, like whether I'm editing something, or if I'm doing work just on my normal work day when I'm normally listening to music. Like that's when I'm listening to music the most, is usually when I'm working on something, so I don't want vocals anyways. So that's why just naturally what I'm listening to a lot more now is just more of the orchestral stuff, or video game stuff, or electronic stuff specifically. And a lot of the rock stuff's kind of fallen to the wayside a little bit, despite the fact that I still like all that stuff. So, yeah, that's kind of the musical journey I went on. But it's one of those things where, I can listen to, all that stuff myself, or likewise, when I'm, in the car with my girlfriend for a couple hours on the way to her place, she likes to listen to a lot of pop music, and I'm okay with listening to that too. So I'm kind of all over the place when it comes to music stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I do want to admit that, I'm not a big Taylor Swift fan. I don't listen to a lot of her music, but her latest album, pretty banging.
Yeah.
I do like her latest album. She, growing to her own genre, away from even away from the pop. It's like a blend of like pretty much a lot of different things. It's a pretty cool album, so I'll give her credit.
Yeah. And also, I'm like you in the sense that I like to listen to full albums as well. Like, I'm not the type of person that's like, all right, I just want to throw my playlist of songs on random and then just have it pick a random assortment of songs for me, like I'm listening to the radio. Like, I don't like that style at all. Like, I mostly like listening to a full album at least a couple times before, listening to songs on their own as well. So you and I are kind of similar on that page as well, because I like because I kind of miss the idea of, cracking open a CD, reading through the booklet as you listen to the whole album and stuff like that, and looking at the artwork and stuff like that. Like, I don't know, there was something about that was just like a really cool thing to do. You just chill and relax and just really get enveloped in like an artist's music. That just,
Yeah,
I
man,
just don't
an
find I'm doing
album
that now.
is a musical journey. That's what I think. It's like, okay, the artist wanted me to listen to these songs in this order. Why is that the case?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I like to at least listen to the whole album at least a couple times.
Yeah,
For sure.
exactly. I'm like, and I've always kind of been like that too. Like, I've never been like, even when I was collecting CDs, I was never the person that would go out and buy a single of, some random song, rather than just buying the full album. Because at that point, it's like, well, if I like a couple songs from this artist, I'll give their album a chance at that point, and definitely try some other stuff out. But anyways, we've gone on long enough about this. We should talk about RPG soundtracks. So before we add 10 more games to our list, because I am imagining, Garrett, we probably even have enough fuel in the tank for maybe a volume 3 at some point. But the first 10 soundtracks that we did last time, we did Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy XIV, Transistor, Persona 3 Portable, Persona 4 Dancing All Night, Mass Effect 2, The Elder Scrolls Online, Chrono Cross, Nier Automata, and Trials of Mana. Those were the 10 we have inducted into the RPG, soundtrack Wall of Fame at that point. So we're going to induct 10 more games tonight. We're going to go back and forth and talk about these. So, Garrett, would you like to go first or second in talking about soundtracks?
I'll go second. Why don't you go first, Ryan?
Oh.
I'm interested how you reveal your list. your five favorites.
So we're gonna do this in an interesting way because I feel like I'm gonna go most traditional to least
Okay.
traditional and kind of experimental. And also, shout out to Locklith in the chat because I'm gonna pull a Locklith because I have almost all these games physical. So I'm gonna be showing off the physical games, including game number one. This game
Mm.
came out in the late '90s. It was a game that we kind of took a chance on because we saw these like random commercials for it on TV, and it was my brother Kyle's birthday, and he got the choice of getting any game he wanted on the PlayStation 1 for his birthday. He went to Walmart and we were like, okay, we're gonna take a chance on this
Mm.
game, see if it's any good. And turns out, Garrett, this game's pretty darn good. But it's not just the game that's good. The music for this game is pretty good, and that game is The Legend of Dragoon on the PlayStation 1. Which, by the way, folks, if you want to be playing this, it's out this week on PlayStation Plus
Oh,
Premium
that's
this week,
nice.
or you can buy it separately on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, which is actually the way
Oh, you
I'd say to
can
do
buy
it.
it separately.
Yeah, because this is
Wow.
actually, many people don't remember this. This is actually a Sony first party title. So this is actually
Yes.
made by Sony. In fact, this was Studio Japan back when Studio Japan was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, Shuhei Yoshida worked on this game, for God's sake. Like,
Yeah.
there were so many people working on this.
Pretty cool.
4 discs, Garrett. This is a 4 disc game that makes
Good Lord.
full use of all 4 discs, but it also makes great use of the music. So the music is actually composed by Takeo Muratitsu, who actually composed Jumping Flash, which is another PlayStation first party game from Studio Japan, as well as Dennis Martin, who worked on a couple TV shows, but kind of has disappeared from the musical radar kind of after this game came out, which is interesting. But when I say that this is the most traditional, like out of all the soundtracks I'm going to induct tonight, this is the one that is the more traditional fantasy sounding soundtrack. Where even though this game was not going for super orchestral, it was going for more traditional fantasy games. And John 32s in the chat asks, is that your brother's copy or did you buy your own? This is actually Kyle's copy of the game. So it's but I mean,
Cheater.
it became mine eventually. Hey, I've got 3 more copies of Legend of Dragoon in a box over there, Garrett. I can pull
Oh
one
my
of them out if you want me
goodness.
to.
That's crazy.
But no, it's fine. It's fine. Anyways, so Legend of Dragoon. The main reason I like it, number one, I think the battle themes as well as a lot of the other exploratory themes are very memorable. There's one where you're going through this like high tech palace towards the middle of the game where you're fighting one of the bigger bosses in the game, and it's got this like really cool kind of like techno sounding feel to it that's also merged with this traditional fantasy style to create this like weird mashup of a song that's really
Oh,
cool. But I like the battle theme again, super catchy. A lot of the late game themes or a lot of the themes around specific big moments in the game are like these like grand musical pieces, and I just really like the music of this game. Also, the opening theme song with the lyrics and stuff, incredible. Just really well done on the singer's part, who I'm blanking on. I should have written that down, because I think the soundtrack is great. It's on Spotify as well, so if you want to go listen to it yourself. In fact, of all the ones I have tonight, almost all of them are actually on Spotify. If you want to go listen to a lot of these for yourselves, but Legend of Dragoon, fantastic soundtrack. I love it a lot, and again, it's the most traditional sounding one on my list, but I had to include it because it's definitely one of the more memorable PlayStation 1 RPG soundtracks to me.
oh, really? Really cool. I'm glad to hear that, and I'll toss Legend of Dragoon into the dark abyss that is my backlog. Because I hear it's really, really good, and I do have like a kind of a gap with PlayStation 1 RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be one that I would definitely gravitate towards. It sounds like a really cool soundtrack.
Yeah,
So, more akin to the classic RPGs, the orchestral versions,
yeah,
especially, hearing Final Fantasy VII, coming from PS1. And then just I hear like other PS1 music every now and then in RPGs, and I don't know, like hearing it now, it seems a little dated, but maybe it's just like you got to be there at the time, but I'm not too sure.
Mhm.
I did like Final Fantasy VII classic music.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. It's just like, oh no, this is definitely coming from that era, which is cool
Yeah.
as well.
Well,
Yeah.
also too, like you have a lot of different musical stylings with the PlayStation One because like you've got games like Final Fantasy VII that are purely MIDI soundtracks because you can definitely tell like it was in development
Mhm.
for the Super Nintendo originally, and then it was in
Yeah.
development for the Nintendo 64, and then it came to the PlayStation. So you can definitely tell like that's why the music stylings are like that. Whereas if you listen to Final Fantasy IX, which came out like 4 years after that, it's like CD quality soundtrack that is not MIDI at all. Like they're two
Mhm.
very different styles. And again, depending on when the games were in development or when they came to the PlayStation One, you'll usually hear one of the two of those. So
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons why like the music on the PlayStation One can be so diverse or can be so different from each other. Just like Legend of Dragoon is one of the later titles for PlayStation One.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why it gravitates more towards the CD style music, like that what you would normally get like the traditional sound music versus MIDI music like in a Final Fantasy VII or
Mm,
like one of the other
pretty
games I'm going to talk about. In fact, probably the next game I talk about is going to fit in that camp.
sounds good. Awesome.
All
Well,
right.
that's a good start. Definitely will have to listen to that soundtrack since it's on Spotify, of course. I'll dive into it. All right, so my first game, and actually it was an honorable mention in my previous episode, but I do want to shout it out now. I love Pokemon. I love Pokemon a lot. I'm a huge fan of it. I like it for a lot of things. Music is not like it's hit or miss, but you have to enjoy the Pokemon music in order to like really get into the game. So I'm gonna have to shout out the original Pokemon games. I
Ooh.
still think personally has like the best like chiptune soundtrack. I don't know. I think I gravitate towards of these chiptune music. That's why I love Shovel Knight um albums so much
Hmm.
because it's just like that chiptune but like without the limitations of that technology. They just go crazy with it. But yeah, Pokemon Red, Yellow, and Blue, some very nostalgic chiptune music in there, man. Like, going from Pallet Town, the different Pokemon, you know, route music. Oh my gosh, I can hear it in my head right now. And like I remember just like hearing this in my sleep too. I'm just like, wait, is my Game Boy on? Like, and I would check my Game Boy and be like, no, it's not on. It's literally in my head, just going through the tones. So yeah, I really do enjoy the soundtrack. The only big reason I think of it is nostalgia, but it really hits on everything about the game too, right? The battle music, catching a Pokemon, you just attach those tunes to what you're doing. And Pokemon did a pretty good job of like having that evolution going throughout the generations of literally keeping almost the same beat with the battle music and catching Pokemon. Like those two, in even the evolution music as well. It's the same kind of beats. You kind of know what you're anticipating or expecting. And it all came down to the original games
Hmm.
and whoever made that. So I'm gonna have to shout it out. Of course, the Ghost Town. I forgot what the Ghost Town was called. I think Lavender Town or something like
Yeah,
that.
it was Lavender Town.
Yeah, pretty dark, and that spooked me a little. The music like haunted me when I was a kid. Um, yeah. So there you go. Shout out to Pokemon Red, Yellow, Blue. I love your music
That's a
so much.
that's a really good one. I'm actually kind of surprised that I didn't think of that because you're right. Like Pokemon's always been known for good music, but a lot of it is like they kind of keep using a lot of the same themes or a lot of the same music going all the way back to the original games. And I think there's something
Mhm.
about Pokemon Red and Blue that like I it's part of the reason why I still like going back to playing those versions today because of the music and because of the way like it feels just walking around the towns in that game as well. Like I don't know, there's just nostalgic elements to it all around, and I think the music is a big part of it. So I'm glad that you hit on that a little bit, Garrett, because I definitely think the music in the original Pokemon games really good. Like I don't think you get a ton of music because like I don't think there's a ton of variety there, but what you get is pretty memorable as well. Like to the point where you're
Mhm.
talking about where you're just like humming it after you're long after you're playing it and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like I do like the other music. Like that's not even my favorite Pokemon set of games, right? Third gen is, but I don't like think of third gen music as the memorable one. It's always the original. And it's
Mhm.
just what they started with. That
Yeah.
was the root of it all. And now you hear music today in Scarlet and Violet, you go through the battle music, go through the catching, it's like it's the same beats
Yep.
every time.
Yeah, imagine if there was a series like Final Fantasy or something like that where they just like use the same songs over and over again for all the games that came out every single year. Like that just doesn't happen. It just for
Right.
that reason because like they want to vary it up and stuff like that. They do use some themes in some of the Final Fantasy games across the games, like the main Final Fantasy theme, for example, but not in the way that Pokemon is, where Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's music is pretty much just in a lot of ways just a redone version of the original soundtrack. So
Hmm.
just in so many ways, which is just
I,
funny to think
I
about.
do have I do have to shout them out though when they have like, kind of a boss like let's say the gym leaders or the Elite Four or like legendary Pokemon. They do like to mix it up a lot. They're like, all right, now go crazy like every single game that they try and do. They like to mix it up. So shout out to that part. But other than that, the root stuff is like, all right, let's go back to the same type of beats and you're gonna love it. And I think it's two things. One's like it hits the nostalgia for the old Pokemon players, but like it's a very catchy set of beats for the new players as well. So
Mm-hmm.
of course it works.
Yeah,
So there you go.
nice, nice. All right, well, next up, Garrett, I gotta at least kind of do a sequel to one of the games I picked last time because I've actually picked Trials of Mana last time, Garrett. Trials of Mana,
Hmm.
fantastic soundtrack. I think it's got a great Super Nintendo soundtrack. I would dare say one of the best Super Nintendo soundtracks, but I think one of the other best Super Nintendo soundtracks comes from another game in the exact same series, and that is Secret of Mana. I gotta throw out there, gotta give it a shout out, especially because like this is gonna be my only Super Nintendo addition to the list. And the Super Nintendo, for folks that out there know, is of course probably one of the best consoles for RPGs, especially with music, because the way that composers worked with the Super NES, music chip, they did incredible stuff with it, and Secret of Mana was no exception. The soundtrack, of course, comes to us from Hiroki Kikuta, who did Soul Calibur 5, Indivisible, Romancing Saga, and a whole lot of games for Square Enix, including all of the games in the Mana series up until I think Dawn of Mana on the PlayStation 2. So he's done a lot of pretty much every game in the series for the most part, or at least all the good ones, I'll say. So the Secret of Mana music, similar to what you talked about with Pokemon, Garrett, it's not just nostalgia, but it's catchy in a way that it almost feels like it's nostalgia, like just the battle music from Secret of Mana, or just the opening, credit crawl where it's describing the story to you, and it's got like this foreboding music underneath, but then it turns into this like awesome uplifting song after that, like the way it morphs into that. Even some of the spooky areas, it's got kind of this like really good spooky music in it. Even just the town theme where you're gonna go buy items, it's got some really memorable music there that I can literally just like I'm hearing in my head as I'm just describing it. It's the prototypical example of the prime example of a great Super Nintendo soundtrack with great catchy tunes, that not only help establish the world, but also keep you humming along the way as you play through it, and will get stuck in your head for days. Because some of the songs in Secret of Mana are super catchy, and you will be humming them just like I am in my head right now. And because I don't want to annoy people, I don't want to hum it on the podcast, but. I can definitely tell like there's some really catchy songs in that game, and I think it's just a fantastic soundtrack from top to bottom with a lot of great variety. Whether you're up in the north, hanging out with Santa Claus, and you've got this icy theme to go along with it that really sets the mood. To even just the song of Mana when you first get the Mana sword, or go to the water temple for the first time, and the music that plays there with this like almost like aqua beat that goes along with it. Like it's got like an interesting time signature on the song. The music in Secret Mana is timeless, and it's definitely one of the best soundtracks out there. In fact, it's funny because when they did the remake of Secret of Mana, what they decided to do is they decided to fully redo all the music with an orchestra, and then have you play that as the background music in the Secret of Mana remake. But there was a toggle in the menu to then go in and turn on the Super Nintendo music instead, and the orchestral music, it just didn't translate the same way because there was something about the way that they programmed that music for the Super Nintendo that played into the reason why that music is timeless. So it was definitely the much better avenue to go in. So Secret of Mana, I have to give it a shout out. It's an incredible game with a great soundtrack.
Cool. Sounds good, man. Another, um, more classic RPG that, I'm gonna have to listen to the music and get into it. That seems really cool.
Yeah. You have to, it'll be on the list at some point for Garrett's backlog adventure, at some point. That's a new segment coming soon, probably at the end of the show, actually. We'll get to that in a bit. But
definitely.
Yeah. But that's a game that will definitely be there at some point. If it's not, it won't be tonight's game that I give Garrett, but it will be there at some point.
Is that one on Switch? Is that the one I have on Switch? I think I have that.
It is in the collection of Mana on Switch.
Okay. Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, because God forbid, Garrett, Square Enix would not put their games on Switch Online. Like, that would never happen. They'll just sell you the games instead.
I mean, they're smart not to.
I mean, it works. It works, right? It's why all these people keep saying that Super Mario RPG will come one day, and I'm just like, no.
You're just laughing.
No.
You suckers are buying the physical edition of Final Fantasy 1 through 6 and having it shipped over.
I don't like the fact that you're calling me a sucker, Garrett, because I'm getting that. And to be fair, I'm not buying one of the Play Asia versions. I actually got mine from the Square Enix store.
But, yeah, got it.
But I'm to be fair, I'm getting the collector's edition with the vinyl record and everything. So
you're going all out.
I'm that literally the target demographic for that collector's edition.
So do you collect vinyl records?
I don't have a collection of them, but I have one that is starting to amass at this point.
I found it very interesting that there's so many offers of vinyl records related to video games. I don't know what's the attraction between the two, because I rarely see like a record player that can able to play these vinyl records. So I think it's just for show, right? Like
I have one in my living room. I have a record player in my living room.
Okay. I'm just curious how many people do though, that gets these.
That's true. I think because like, don't get me wrong, it's cool to have like the vinyl art to look through, but come on, you want to be able to listen to it. That's the main reason you're getting a vinyl, because like the main reason you get a vinyl is because it is like the best uncompressed way of listening to that music.
Okay. It's all about the sound. With the record play. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
sounds good.
Yeah, because that's the thing with music, where like music quality has only gone down as new technology for music has been introduced. Because you went to cassettes, which were worse than CDs. So then you got CDs, but then when you went down to MP3s, the musical quality just shot down. And then streaming services is even lower than that, where you're listening to, when you stream music on Spotify, a lot of times it's worse than what's on the radio as far as quality wise.
Oh, that sucks.
So that's why people chase the vinyl records, Garrett.
I'm not an audiophile, so okay. I also saw a lot of Persona vinyls too.
Yeah.
So, and people going crazy over it. I'm like, I'm just intrigued this significant overlap of the music listeners and audiophiles over the video gamers and the collectors. Like they're pretty.
They go hand in hand, but vinyl collecting has actually become much more popular these days. Just across the board, whether you're a movie person or a TV person or just a listener of music. So, yeah, I think it plays into it a little bit. But anyways, we got a little off topic, Garrett, because I want to hear from you next. What's your next game?
Sounds good. Game number 2, and I think this one's pretty predictable as well, because I had another game from this studio last time, Supergiant Games. I'm gonna have to shout out Bastion. It is another great soundtrack from that line of studios. Bastion, an action adventure role-playing game. I think it's one of the first generation of like indie games that you can think of, like just starting out, um, that was Supergiant's, debut game as well, and they put a lot of heart and soul into their album. It's composed by one person, Darren Korb, and he does a lot of like the announcements too, of the game, like within his songs. It's actually kind of cool because he like would like announce something and then a building would just drop in the game as he's just playing the guitar. It's just like, and it's just a string guitar, as he keeps on going, and then he mixes a lot of modern beats to it. Like you'll have some rock beats or some drums or some orchestral stuff. It's a lot of mixed fusion elements put together, and it's not a long album either. It's only 1 hour,
Mhm.
but you look it up on Spotify because there's a lot of hits on it. It came out in 2011, the soundtrack on Spotify. So,
Yeah.
but still, it's like I some of them are like 7, 8 million hits on Spotify, which is pretty good. For a video game soundtrack, that's like an indie video game soundtrack. That's pretty good. So yeah, I would definitely recommend if you have not played Bastion, I would recommend doing that. Um, I would not say like, oh, just listen to the soundtrack. I would say play the video game and listen to the music because the music really coincides with the gameplay,
Yeah.
a lot. So yeah,
Especially
that's
with the way the narrator works too. Like I feel like that
hmm
plays in with the music in such a way that it almost feels hard to separate them. Like I don't like that's the type of game where I don't know if I'd want to listen to the soundtrack on Spotify because I almost
hmm
feel like be missing something without the gameplay or without the narrator in a way.
hmm
But that's a good
hmm
pick though, because again, like just like you talked about with Transistor last time, Supergiant Games does not miss with their soundtracks. I think all their soundtracks are really,
hmm
really solid. And Bastion is
hmm
another prime example. Also, good use of guitar in that one as well.
Very good use of guitar.
I love the use of the guitar in the Bastion soundtrack. So I'm glad we have that on here as well. I think that's a good one. And that was one when I remembered you had talked about Transistor last time. I was like, he's probably talking about Bastion again this time at
Of
this point.
course. I think I won't like if we do a following theory, I don't think there's another album from Supergiant Games that really stand out. Those are the two though that
Yeah.
I'm like,
I don't know. Hades is pretty good. I think the Hades
it is
soundtrack is
pretty
pretty good.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But nice. Nice. And Pyro's soundtrack, I don't think is that bad either. I think it's pretty good too. But
Pyre is long forgotten. Like it's that's an interesting game.
yeah.
I played a good chunk of it. I'm like, they were really mixing with their ideas here. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
All right. Well, it's definitely time for Ryan Turford to pull out the most Ryan Turford pick of all
uh,
time as we're starting to get to the more experimental soundtracks or soundtracks that are definitely less traditional sounding. This one, of course, another PlayStation 1 game. And actually it's closer to the Final Fantasy 7 type where there is some MIDI music in this one, but it's kind of in that weird gray area where they were starting to experiment with actual music and then MIDI music. So some of the soundtrack's MIDI and some of it's not. But this soundtrack is Parasite Eve because of course your boy
okay.
Ryan Turford has to find yet another reason to talk about Parasite Eve on a podcast. So the music for this, yeah, it's like first of all, you'll be impressed when I tell you who composed this. This is Yoko Shinomura. She composed Street Fighter 2, Live Alive, Super Mario RPG, Xenoblade Chronicles, as well as like 100 other games. Like she's composed some big
Interesting.
stuff with some great music. So that's got to tell you all you need to know about the musical quality behind a game like Parasite Eve. So of course I've talked about it before on the show, but Parasite Eve, in case y'all haven't are new to the podcast, is a survival horror RPG from Square Enix that takes place in New York City, and there's this big viral takeover, and that's trying to like evolve the humans into like more evolved beings. Of course, these evolved beings want to rip each other's faces off and stuff like that, in true horror fashion. But the music that goes alongside Parasite Eve is really interesting because on one hand, some parts of the music are very much your typical Resident Evil, like setting the mood style of music. to try and create a creepy atmosphere. But other styles of music, like the open world theme where you're selecting where you want to go on the map of New York City, to the combat theme, to certain other things. There's like some crazy techno music in this game that fits in there, but it's just so good. Like I just love like the musical variety and different song types that are in this game, and they go kind of all over the place as far as range and styling. And I think just Yoko did a fantastic job of putting the soundtrack together. And it's one of the reasons why I like to go, like, this is one of the soundtracks I actually like to listen to when I'm working on stuff. Because, yes, there's some of the, atmosphere building stuff. But there's a lot of, like, really, like, upbeat or just, like, fast paced tunes as well to really get the blood pumping in a good way. Especially, again, the combat theme, is just so good. It's one of my favorite RPG combat themes in any RPG. So gotta give a shout out to Parasite Eve. Yoko Shinomura did an amazing job on it, and I have to add it to the list, Garrett. Parasite Eve. What do you think?
It sounds good, man. It sounds pretty interesting. Like all the different like blends with that game. Yeah. I don't know. Like you're going through these classic RPGs and you're like trying to explain to me what these music are. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I guess so. And it's like I'm excited for you, Ryan. I really am. But I think other than listening to the soundtracks, I really gotta play these games in
Yeah.
order to like you know, actually, feel what you're feeling with this music. Of course, too, it's nostalgic for you, and I think nostalgia hits a big, side with different games as well. So,
That's true, but I will say a game like Parasite Eve I did not play until the first time until a couple years ago. So
oh, interesting.
it's a
Okay.
newer game to me. So it's definitely not a nostalgia thing with that one. And actually, these next two, funny enough, Garrett, are actually newer games that are not nostalgic picks.
Hmm.
But I know you haven't played them either. So we're gonna run into the same thing even with newer games. So just to throw it out there.
For sure, for sure. Sounds good.
But
As I yeah, that's what I think of it, Ryan. Is like good for you, and I will listen to the soundtrack when I get to it in the backlog adventure.
you better believe Parasite Eve is
And
going in there. You do know that's like one of the first ones I'm gonna pick for you.
you said it's a short game,
You can.
so
It is. You can beat it in 8 hours.
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That is short.
Yeah.
That's like
And
a
it's
week.
and when I say 8 hours, it's 8 hours like linear enough where it won't be like Golden Sun and you won't get lost for 20 hours, Garrett.
Oh,
And
that's good.
there's no grinding either. So there you go.
Cool.
All right,
Sounds good.
Garrett, what's
I'm
your
down.
next game?
My next game, I think this one I is gonna be in here because it's been a couple years between our last soundtrack episode and this one. We played a lot more RPGs since then,
Yep.
and of course this one had to be in there, had to be included. Xenoblade Chronicles 3
Yep.
soundtrack. Oh my gosh, like give me in all the feels. My goodness. So do you know the music composer for Xenoblade Chronicles 3?
I've heard of his name,
Very.
but I don't remember it off the top of my head. So you have to
Is it
refresh my memory.
Yasunori? Is it Yasunori Mitsuda? I think the person who made composer of Chrono Trigger and Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and many other RPGs, Xenogears, stuff like that. Yeah, I guess he directed this as well, and maybe Kokojima, maybe I don't know. Anyways, the music here is fantastic, and of course, it's centered around the flute music, the classic flute music into the games that kind of just wrapped around how to send people off in after death. It's kind of it makes you think music is transcendent, pretty spiritual, powerful stuff. Especially like when you have, the two separate clans having their own flute music tunes separately as a song, different songs. And then once they come together, it's harmonized and like kind of like doing different beats and everything, but and you can tell, oh, it's supposed to be the same song. And I think that's super cool. I think that was a great way of melding music into game and story and exposition. This game is all about like letting go and like transcending off. Like, how do we let the people not die in vain? How do we send them off in peace after, what they've gone through life? That, and that's why they had certain people, you know, practice doing this flute music stuff is to, send them off. I think they did an incredible job with the music. Other than the flute music, of course, there's a lot of great orchestral pieces that really hit you
Mhm.
in a lot of emotional scenes. I wouldn't say like the atmospheric music in the game is fine. It's not like nothing to write home to, but definitely like during cutscenes. I was like just going into tears just because it was a climactic scene, and then there's the emotional orchestral piece. I'm just like, oh my gosh, why are you doing this to me? And it's just raising all the scenes, and the endorphins are going. Um, yeah, so there you go. Xenoblade Chronicles 3. You did a really good job of putting your music into the gameplay, into the story. So yeah, that's one of my top soundtracks because of it.
Yeah. I knew that one was coming. And if it wasn't that one, it might have been even just the original Xenoblade Chronicles, but definitely 3. That's the one that I've heard from a ton of people because I still haven't played Xenoblade Chronicles 3, of course. I have the collector's edition on my shelf, but I haven't played it yet. I'll play it at some point, maybe
Proud of
one
you.
day. But no, it's come up time and time again that the music is one of the best parts of the game. So I can definitely understand why you'd pick that as your choice, and it all makes sense as far as the themes and are concerned in the game. So I'm happy that you picked it and happy you added it to the list. If for nothing else, so then we don't get an angry letter from Nagachaka last week asking why we didn't pick it. So
Yeah,
because that would happen. He would
been,
let us know about it.
you've been pretty angry. Yeah, if
Would've
at
been.
least not one of the 3.
Yeah, because we talked because we talked about Nier Automata last time in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. So I feel like Nagachaka's satiated at this point.
Yes, he's filled.
Yeah. All right, Garrett. Moving on, because of course this episode is celebrating Theatrhythm Final Bar Line. Of course, celebrating 30 years of incredible Final Fantasy music. The Final Fantasy series has been no stranger to incredible soundtracks throughout the years. In fact, last time I picked Final Fantasy 14 as my favorite Final Fantasy soundtrack. It still is at this point, even with the addition of Endwalker that we got between the recording of the last episode and this episode. Like, that soundtrack is incredible. One of the best, probably one of the top 5 soundtracks I've heard in the last decade for a game is Endwalker. But that's not the game I'm going to add tonight to the list, because I told you I'm going to be a little more out there with some of these picks, and I think for good reason, because this one actually, out of all of the games that I'm going to pick tonight, plays so much into and my own internal biases and my own musical styling as far as the type of music I like to listen to. And this one is kind of a strange pick for those that think about the history of Final Fantasy games, because this is actually a newer Final Fantasy game. This one actually came out in 2013, so it is not a old game or anything like that. No old game is old here. In fact, it's from a series of Final Fantasy games that people do not like, because Final Fantasy fans traditionally do not like the Final Fantasy 13 games at all. But I have always said that the Final Fantasy 13 games have always all had great soundtracks, whether it's the original one or Final Fantasy 13 2. But the one I'm going to add is Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13. The game that, again, nobody likes this game except me. But again, part of the reason why I like this game as much as I do is because of the soundtrack. So the soundtrack is composed by Masahashi Hamauzu, and he did not just the Final Fantasy 13 soundtracks, he also did Final Fantasy 7 Remake soundtrack, which people love. But of course, I love the 7 Remake soundtrack, but I think that the Lightning Return one is actually more consistent across the board as far as themes that I really like. So one of the things I love about this soundtrack is it basically takes these It has these like really rockin' songs. Like there's a lot of rock music in this game that's spliced in with violins or synthesizers. So it kind of blends electronic and rock music in a great way with these string violins throughout the case. Like the battle theme is kind of all over the place with the violins and these really like bassy bass riffs in there, as well as some awesome use of some synthesizer in there as well to create like this very catchy battle theme. But even just a lot of the exploration themes or some of the themes that play in some of the bigger moments are just kind of all over the place and are very experimental as far as the music stylings. And that's one of the things I love about it, because it actually it's one thing when they try and do something experimental with music and it kind of falls flat on its face and it just doesn't work. But that's not what happens here. I actually think the music actually really heightens the experience and definitely makes a game that would normally just be mediocre, cross over the mediocrity line and actually make the game a better experience overall because the music is in it. So, and in fact, it's one of the reasons that drew me to want to try this game in the first place, was because I heard the music before the game came out and was like, okay, I'm not really into the Final Fantasy 13 games at the time, but I do want to try this one because the music was so good. And I was definitely let down by the game itself, but the music was great the entire time I was playing it. And then it's also one of those soundtracks, again, I listen to a lot when I'm working or doing other things because it's just so gosh darn good. It's better than the game deserves at this point. So Final Fantasy, Lady Returns Final Fantasy 13, aka Final Fantasy 13-3. That is the soundtrack I am submitting from the Final Fantasy series. Tonight, I'm sure if we do another one of these, of course I'll bring up another Final Fantasy soundtrack, but I had to include this one here. And I also, again, didn't want to, because it's easy, Garrett. It's easy to just pull up Final Fantasy 6 or Final Fantasy 4 from the Super Nintendo or Final Fantasy 7. Just say, yeah, we'll just add that. No, that's not Ryan Turfit's style. Okay.
You're gonna be the underdog.
I will fight for Lightning Returns. Because again, it plays so well into the type of music I already enjoy outside of games, that just made me like that soundtrack even more. So had to include it here as definitely, I think, one of the better Final Fantasy soundtracks.
Cool. I'm happy for you. I'm happy that you enjoy the soundtrack, and it's kind of interesting that you say that pushes the mediocrity of the game like over to like actually a good game.
Yeah.
Because of the soundtrack, it really enhances the experience. There's very few examples to me where I was like, I'm not really enjoying a game, or it's pretty medium or mediocre and the soundtrack like pushes it to the next thing. But I don't think about the music as much, but if it's good, like pretty good music, it's like I'm right there with you. It's like, oh, this is actually, even though the game's kind of mid or whatever, this soundtrack is pretty dope. So I'm just gonna keep on just listening to it. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. I hear Final Fantasy 13 pretty good on Xbox.
Yeah.
It's not on Xbox Game Pass anymore, but it's I heard performs pretty well.
Yeah, they went back and they kind of re-upped the performance of the game, and they actually up-resed all the cinematics to 4K instead of compressed 720p like they were in the original Xbox 360 version.
Right. Goodness.
But Lightning Returns actually looked good on all both 360 and PS3. So it was the one that got the least amount of work when they did the porting. But 13 and 13.2 definitely needed the extra work because the 360 versions of both those games were terrible.
Gotcha. Sounds good.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it came out so late, like 2013. I don't think I was like really in the know of Final Fantasy during the time.
It came out
And
the same year as the PlayStation 4.
Yeah, the same year as PlayStation 4.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember playing a lot of Borderlands 2 during that year. And it's like that was like the only game I was thinking of. But man, 13.3. I definitely want to go and, try out all these different Final Fantasy games, but you'll set me on the straight
You got to
path.
finish Final Fantasy 7 first because you've already started that one game.
That's true.
And
That's true.
then you go from
Actually, I'll probably restart it. I'll probably restart that one.
Probably.
I forgot a lot of it.
Then you can go back to the
All right.
Gold Saucer all over again. But Garrett, what's your last game?
Oh my God, Gold Song. Anyways, next game. For me, this one's an interesting pick. I would not say this is everyone's like, oh my gosh, great pick, Garrett. This is like an amazing soundtrack. This is like more like an acquired taste. Definitely for me. Definitely atmospheric. Shin Megami Tensei 5. Now,
Oh,
it's a great game. It's a very great gameplay. Story's kind of meh. But the soundtrack to this is probably the one of the most obscure soundtracks I have heard in a video game. It has a lot of, man, just like minor keys and more electronic synth type of vibe going on. It's meant to be more atmospheric than anything else. Um, and if you do look at the soundtrack on Spotify, you will notice like a lot of people like kind of just go through like a lot of the songs there and pick out the best ones. And there's like 4 or 5 of the songs in there that like it's like okay, 4,000, 4,000, 300,000, and then back to 2,000, 3,000. You hit those 100,000 hits and those songs are like they're banging. Like you're ready to go. You're ready, you just start a run or go and study. It's like really hyping up music. Has a lot of electronic beats to it for sure. It has more minor tones than anything. It's pretty dark. It's pretty twisted. But it's so cool. Like the way that they just blend the guitar electronic like riffs in there and just it's like, oh my gosh, this is really, really cool. And I'm glad that they did this. And it's one of the few video games. Actually, I don't think I've told you this before, Ryan, but in a lot of RPGs, once I'm getting into the motion, if I'm not like in a story scene or whatever, I'm just like grinding. Um, I mute the game a lot. I don't know why. It's just I think it's just so repetitive to me. It's like, okay, I could be paying attention to something else and just, walk around the world and mute and just be fine. I do that for a lot of RPGs. This one in particular, it's like, okay, no. Once I'm in battle, I want to hear that music so badly. And so this is one of the very few games that I did not mute a lot of the time. So there you go. Shin Megami Tensei 5 is one of my favorite like soundtracks, but I can understand it's not for everyone
yeah.
for sure.
It definitely
Mhm.
doesn't sound like the type of soundtrack I would listen to a lot, but I'm glad that you've they definitely worked for you, especially with how long I remember you playing that game, Garrett. So you must have
It was
really liked the
a lot.
soundtrack if you left the soundtrack on as long as you did while you were playing that game.
Hmm. It was pretty good, especially the battle music.
Yeah,
Oh, there you go.
nice. All right, last pick of the night, Garrett. Before we go to audience submissions, this one also from Atlas, also came out after we recorded the last episode of the last soundtrack episode, and was actually my favorite game to come out in 2020. And that game is 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim on the Switch and the PlayStation 4. Because this
Nice.
game soundtrack is bonkers. It is all over the place. Because on one hand, it kind of fits with the duality of the two game styles you got here. Because on one hand, when you're in the visual novel esque kind of segments where you're walking around town or walking around school with your friends and stuff, you've got very normal sounding music and stuff like that. Like it's very traditional sounding music. But Garrett, when you go into mech battles and you're fighting kaiju, oh man, that's an EDM lover's dream. This soundtrack, the music when you're playing in the combat is incredible. It is bonkers. In fact, most of the songs are composed in such a way where, as you progress through certain stages of the battle, the music will then change depending on the stage that you are, the section of the battle you're in, and then go throughout it. And then like the final boss theme is like an amalgamation of like all the other themes from all the other battles in the game that kind of play through as you're progressing through certain moments of the final battle. It's just like, oh my god, it's just I can't even like I'm just kind of smiling from ear to ear just talking about this soundtrack, because this soundtrack is so good. It sticks with you in such an incredible way that, again, just what I talked about with Lightning Returns, it really heightens an already great experience even higher with how integral the music is, both in the battle scenes, but even just when you do have the more kind of, simple melodies or the more normal music outside of the battles, like all that stuff is great too. Including during some key moments where you've got music that really heightens the tension. The music in 13 Sentinels is like a tour de force. It's done by Hiroshi Sakamoto, who did the music for Valkyria Chronicles and Final Fantasy Tactics, as well as a whole bunch of other games for Square Enix and Sega. And This game is no slouch when it comes to the soundtrack. And this is also the only one that I talked about tonight that's not on Spotify. So if you want to hear any of the soundtracks I talked about tonight, you can go there and listen to them. This one, 13 Sentinels, you'll have to go listen to on YouTube if you're interested in checking it out. But God, this soundtrack is so good. And it's one of the things that just elevates this game from being an amazing game to a masterpiece, in my opinion, is the soundtrack. So had to give it a shout out.
Dude. Very cool. Yeah, I didn't know the music was really good in that game. I know that game is good in terms of gameplay and story and character development. I hear it all the time, like from you and from other people that played this game's like, this one's the best ever. I'm just like, dang, okay, I gotta check it out. But I thank you for letting me know that the soundtrack is really good too. So
Yeah.
I do have it. I've had it since well, I have it on PS4. I had it since maybe like 20 when it came out. It was like 2020.
Yeah, it came out in 2020, and I remember it going on sale a lot. So I think you might have just
Yeah.
picked up probably when it was on sale because it goes on sale all the time.
I wanted to get the cover sleeve and everything, so I did get that. Really cool stuff. But I'll definitely, hey, you knock on that door more and more. I will probably get in that short list. Just keep knocking.
Yeah, it's
Really
fine.
cool
It's only
game.
like a 40-hour game, Garrett. Like no problem. You'll crush it. At least it's on Switch, but I know you don't have it there. But anyways, Garrett, before we move on, do you have any honorable mentions that you want to go through real quick? Because we've been going for a while. We won't linger on them too long.
I have my 5th pick. Gonna go through my 5th pick?
I thought you already had 5 because you went first.
No,
wait, I went first. I'm sorry, I'm old. Please go on, Garrett. I'm sorry, I'm rushing the show.
It's all good. My 5th pick, and I'll be quick about it too, is actually from a recent game I've been playing. I haven't finished yet, Chained Echoes. You've heard about this one, and I definitely highly recommend it to anyone that loves classic, the top-down JRPGs like SNES, PS1. It reminds me so much of Chrono Trigger. It's kind of crazy. But it blends in a lot of different things, including the soundtrack, which is actually made by a smaller composer named Eddie Marianukro. I don't know. I don't want to spell it out. It's like kind of crazy, but you can actually just look him up on Twitter. You can look at Chained Echoes and like look at who the composer is. He's actually from my hometown, from Dallas, which is pretty cool to hear. And he, is a big active on Twitter. He supports a lot of indie developers and composers as well. He does a very good job with the soundtrack. It's very elaborate, more elaborate than most other indie RPGs that you see. It goes from just very, light and orchestral pieces down to like more synth wavy electronic beats, fusion, similar type of vibes going on. There's definitely some selected songs that are really cool. The whole soundtrack is on Spotify and on YouTube, uploaded by him. And so yeah, I would just, if you're not checking the game out, I would definitely check out the soundtrack even just for a little bit, just to get the feel of what this, like, the soundtrack is. Because I definitely like going through this game. It's a great game, but as you said, like the soundtrack really pushes the boundary. The soundtrack is really, really good, and it sets in kind of very atmospheric. Has very different worlds. It has very different genres all around. So this guy did a very good job for his like debut-ish type of game. So yeah, there we go. Chained Echoes. My 10th pick.
That's awesome.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that game is like still on my radar at some point. I do need to play it at some point. So maybe one day I'll play that game at some point. We'll see.
Maybe.
Yeah, again, Garrett, you just keep throwing it up there. I'll just keep knocking on the door. I'll play it eventually. at some point. And we could actually talk about it at some point. I think that would be kind of
It'd
cool.
be really cool. Chain Echoes is a really good game. I need to go back to it after Fire Emblem, but yeah, by how much I play it, it's like I'll finish it pretty soon.
Nice. All right. Going to back to my previous question, Garrett. Any honorable mentions at all?
I think I'm good. I think I'm out of honorable mentions. I went through my list, and other than kind of the honorable mentions I mentioned last episode, I think the one was like Fire Emblem, Shadows of Valencia
Mhm.
was like one of my favorite soundtracks from that franchise. But other than that, I think I'm good. What about you?
Nice. So one of my runner-ups last time was Indivisible, again from the same composer as Secret of Mana. I still think that soundtrack's incredible, so I definitely highly recommend that one. Final Fantasy VII Remake, because duh, of course. And then the other one I want to give a shout out to is, we haven't ever mentioned it before, is Diablo 2. I actually have been playing a lot of like Diablo 2 Resurrected pretty late, like lately, and it
Nice.
reminded me that soundtrack's actually really good, especially like the classic Diablo theme on like the mandolin, and even just like going to like the desert theme and stuff like that too. I just really love like the different themes for all the different areas in Diablo 2, and I think it's just a really strong soundtrack overall as well. Like it just really fits like the dark tone of that game in such a great way.
Nice.
So I want to give
I just got Diablo 2 on Switch because actually, spoiler alert, Diablo kind of sucks on Steam Deck. You can't really install it and make it control very well because it's on a different browser. So I did get it on Switch with gold coins. So I'm
okay.
pretty excited to play Diablo 2
Nice.
on Switch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that game's still awesome. So, and it's got a great soundtrack. So had to include it there as well. In fact, I've been playing a lot of classic Blizzard games lately because I've also been playing a lot of StarCraft 1, some other stuff. So there's that
Nice.
too. Yeah. All right, let's let some of our audience into the cave with us. Let's start with Nagachaka, who said, why do RPGs have the best soundtracks compared to other video game genres? Xenoblade Chronicles 1 through 3, Nier Automata and Nier Replicant, Persona 5 Royal, Skyrim, and Final Fantasy Remake, just to name a few. Well, to answer Nagachaka's question, I will say I think the reason that is part of that anyways is just the way that the games are developed, in the sense that the developers know that you're probably going to be spending a ton of time playing RPGs. So they want to make sure that the music itself is catchy, but also you're not going to get sick of it right away. Like that's the main reason why, you know, I think the battle theme in Persona 5 Royal is composed in the way it is, where it's super catchy and gets stuck in your head, but it's also not ever really going to get annoying the like 200th time that you listen to it. Like it's purposely designed to do that. So I think that's just part of the reason why and all of that too, we're just naturally spending more time with RPGs. So I just think the music just resonates with us more than, you know, a game like Wolfenstein, the New Order or something like that, because you're just spending so much more time with an RPG that you're just so much more attached to the music in that game. But what do you think about this idea, Garrett?
I think you're right, at least for that reason. I don't know. I argue that RPG soundtracks are great, but like there's so many non-RPG soundtracks that are fantastic too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of agnostic. Like I don't lean that RPGs are like, oh, I think they do a pretty good job of like making orchestral pieces and like making it more complete for the game. But man, like I can name a few games that are non-RPGs. I'm like, I would just be banging my head and just studying like all night with soundtracks like Hotline Miami,
Yeah.
like Shovel Knight. Like those are the two big ones that
Yeah.
like really get into my head. So yeah, I'm very agnostic about it.
Yeah. I have to give the shout out to Doom 2016. That soundtrack is
Doom,
still,
yeah, dude.
oh, it's so good. But moving on, Brian X says, I'd have to say my favorite soundtracks come from the SNES era. Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, Mega Man, and Super Mario RPG, to name a few. There's something about 2D music that just hits a bit harder than modern day soundtracks. Almost forgot Donkey Kong Country. So good. Yeah, a lot of those classic Super Nintendo soundtracks, it's hard to beat them. They're really good. But
Donkey Kong Country, man, so good. The music, at least the second one, I love it so much.
And then the last one, Skycatcher Gaming, you might be proud of this one, Garrett. My favorites are Fire Emblem Three Houses, Ys 8, Radiant Historia, Nier, Grandia, and Shin Megami Tensei 5, to name a few. Why did you have to get me started on talking about all these RPGs with Breed music? So there you go. Someone else who shares the love for Shin Megami Tensei 5's soundtrack, Garrett. Look at that.
It's really cool.
Yeah, you're not alone.
I'm glad.
But then, Garrett, to round out the show, we got 2 non-music related questions. The first one comes to us from I Can't See, who asks the question, how does the weapon degradation in Breath of the Wild compare to that of other games that you've played? And the answer is, there aren't many games that are like Breath of the Wild's weapon degradation system. Even in RPGs, when you repair your equipment, you usually just go to the blacksmith and you press a button and it repairs your equipment, and then you just go about your day. You're not really dealing with the weapons breaking or anything like that. But what do you think about this question, Garrett? Because I just don't. I think Breath of the Wild is just such a unique case that it's just hard to compare it against anything else.
Yeah, it's I've been hearing this question a lot in other podcasts and interesting answers. And I think one that really resonated with me was Donnie's answer from the Nintendo Shack, where he said it's like ammo.
Yeah.
Like what weapons are more like ammo than anything. It's more, yeah. And I completely agree with him. It makes it more dispensable, these weapons. And so I feel like, at least for Breath of the Wild, I did not have too much of a problem with the degradation just because I get so much more weapons. It would be a bummer if like a big strong weapon got degraded and like broke away, but at the same time there was just so many good weapons I had it in my inventory available, ready to switch. Like it didn't really matter to me too much. Now compared to other games, all other games are not thinking that weapons are dispensable. They're just thinking that it loses its effectiveness. Like Dark Souls, and Monster Hunter, you gotta repair. You gotta sharpen your blade. I think the only other genre that does this, or franchise that does is the Atelier games. You can make weapons left and right in that game because you're crafting so much. And there's a degradation to the weapons. It's not as severe, for sure, as Breath of the Wild. But yeah, it is an interesting question. But it's just the way they handled weapons in that game is very different than other games. I at least personally.
Yeah, pretty much every other game just very different from it. So it's just hard to compare in a lot of ways. But and likewise, I like the fact that we don't have a lot of RPGs that do that kind of thing, because I just don't think they'd fit in. And to your point, it rides a fine balance. And the reason why Breath of the Wild worked in the way that it did with the weapon degradation is that Nintendo found the right balance of making sure you're fed with enough good weapons for it not to be a miserable experience when one breaks. Like that's the only way that a system like that works, where it's enjoyable anyways. But
I agree.
Yeah. Moving on to our last question, and this is more of a question from me, Garrett, but if you have anything to chime in, feel free to ask. This comes to us from Blaze Knight, who says, I remember you playing Scarlet Nexus, Ryan, but I couldn't find it on the feed. Can you refresh my memory with your thoughts on the game, and if you recommend playing both paths? So Scarlet Nexus, I know it's on the top of mind for some people because it just came to PlayStation Plus Premium this month as well. But Scarlet Nexus, of course, from Bandai Namco, is from the makers of the Tales series. It's an action RPG. It's really good. I talked about it a lot on Xbox Drive, so it's not on this feed's Blade Night, but it would be when Sean and I were playing the game together when it came out. So we were talking about it back then. In fact, I'm gonna just show off a little bit. I've got this statue of Kasane, who is one of the two main characters from Scarlet Nexus, on my shelf as well. So
I remember her.
Yeah. So it absolutely did. So to answer your questions, Blade Knight, number one, first of all, I think the game's awesome. I really enjoyed my time with Scarlet Nexus. It was one of my favorite games in the year that came out in. Although I remember, because it was 2020, I remember there being a lot of good games that year. So it wasn't my favorite game or anything like that, but I did really enjoy that game a lot more than I thought I was going to anyways. And I do recommend, if you are going to play it and you care about the story at all, you should play both paths because you can play as two different protagonists. And they play very differently from each other, and their story is a bit different. Like it crosses over at certain points, but for the most part, you're getting kind of two pretty different experiences between the two characters. And as a result, if you want like the complete story, you do have to play as, do both paths. Kind of like Nier Automata, where you have to play the game, 3 times and get all the
ways.
endings. Yeah. So I think it's definitely worth doing that if you're invested in the story. If you don't care about the story and you enjoyed just playing as one of the other characters, I don't see any reason why you need to go back. But if you're enjoying the story and you want to actually get the full experience, you do have to do both paths, definitely. But
cool.
Anyways, before we go, Garrett, we got one last segment to do that I meant to do at the beginning of the show, but I've totally forgot until halfway through the topic. I was just like, let's do it at the end here. So Garrett, you have tasked me with picking games for you to play on your backlog. And I need to, of course, we need to come up with a good title. For now, I'm just subbing in Garrett's Backlog Adventure for now.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Garrett's Backlog Adventure. So I'm going to assign, what's going to happen here is I'm going to assign Garrett a new game to play every month, and he has to figure out how to play it, or at the very least, if we need to extend it, we'll extend it beyond the month period. But
yes,
because I'll just add to Garrett's backlog as I do normally. So Garrett, the first game I'm going to task you with playing is a game you've already started, but then put down because it was the worst time for it to come out. And it's also a game that I know is not super long. So I know that you can actually, conceivably beat this game. And it's a game I already know you like because it's a genre that you like because you're already playing Fire Emblem right now. Because that game, I want you to go back and play Shining Force, Garrett. I want you to finish it.
Okay. I will play Shining Force for you on the Switch.
Because I'm like this close, Garrett, to just telling you not to play Shining Force 1 and play Shining Force 2 instead. But because I know you started enjoying Shining Force 1 and because you've already played it and because, there are some story ties, you should just play the first one first. But,
cool. I will play Shining Force 1 for you, Ryan. And yeah, again, the rules and limitations here. It's going to be 1 month. So 4 weeks from now, we're going to come back, reconvene in this segment. I'm going to talk about where I'm at with Shining Force. Hopefully beat it by then. I don't think it's a long game.
No, it's not a long game. You could finish it in 10 to 15 hours, I think.
Oh, okay.
But that's for a fresh playthrough, like someone who's never played it before, kind of thing. Like someone who's played it before can definitely finish it faster. But
sounds good. So yeah, Shining Force. Probably reconvene in a month, see where I'm at with the game because I'll be playing other games too. It's just this one will be my homework, and the reason why I want to do this, Ryan, with you is because all the classic RPG stuff that I keep missing gaps on, especially with this Sega Genesis, SNES, and PS1 era. Like that era right there, I'm just Ryan, I'm literally telling you, here's a blank slate, mold it.
Yeah.
That's all I'm telling you. Just
trust me, I have plans. Before this year is over, Garrett, you will have played a Sega CD RPG, or you will have played a Sega Genesis RPG. You will have played a PlayStation 1 RPG. You will have played a Super Nintendo RPG, and I think we may be able to arrange it where you play a Sega Saturn RPG before the year is over.
That would have been crazy. That's nuts.
Yeah.
Sega Saturn. Oh my gosh. All right. Sounds good.
Exactly.
I'm not telling Ryan, I'm not guaranteeing you I'm finishing all of these games, but I will at least give it a good old fashioned try and get through it and see where I'm at.
And likewise, if we reconvene in a month and we get the sense that you're not enjoying it, I'll pick a new game for you. Because we're not gonna force you, Garrett, to play games you don't like. Because that's not part of it. I just want you to try more stuff, which is why I'm glad that you have an open-ended system where you can play PS1 games and stuff like that, or Sega CD games, or some weird stuff. I'm actually almost tempted to assign you a Game Gear game, Garrett, at some point as well.
Jesus, what have I got myself into?
Hey, you asked for this. You asked. This is your own fault in a way. But
interesting.
Yeah.
Before we close out the show, I want to ask you this because I know there was a lot of RPGs that came out of the direct. Is there any games that you wanted to shout out from the direct, Nintendo Direct itself? Is there any RPGs that really caught you? I'm just curious.
Not really, but this time around, it wasn't a huge RPG heavy direct because we did have Octopath Traveler 2,
Mhm,
which looks awesome.
mhm.
But for the most part, if I'm remembering correctly, they're just a lot of the big things that I took away from the direct this time were, Game Boy Advance or Metroid Prime, Zelda, Pikmin,
Okay.
like stuff like that. Like that's why like this time around the RPGs were, a little more muted than
Interesting.
previous Nintendo Directs. Because Sea of Stars was there. I didn't play the demo yet. I certainly want
Oh, I
to.
did.
Yeah,
Really cool.
yeah.
Hmm.
I definitely want to do
Wait.
that at some point.
Yeah, so I do want to shout this out because I'm not in Shack anymore, but I really want to shout out all the games I'm excited for. Buying Kaidos,
Oh
1
yes,
and 2 HT, of course. Really excited about that. Etrian Odyssey collection, the Origins collection.
hmm
That's kind of big. I never thought they would do this, Ryan, just because the way Etrian Odyssey plays, it plays like a DS game. It plays like a 3DS game. You
yeah.
need a touchscreen. I'm curious how they kind of do this on PC and Switch.
Because they
Um,
showed it off a little bit
and
where you've got the map
yeah,
accessible on the screen and somehow you're scribbling on it even though you don't have a touch screen. But also, Garrett, that gives us hope that maybe we get Persona Q1 and 2 at some
that'd be
point.
cool. That'd be cool. And then Fantasy Life as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's a new one coming out from Level 5. Level 5 had a lot of games in Nintendo Direct. And then for the Japanese, Nintendo Direct is also coming to the West. The first Atelier game, Atelier Murray, getting a remake.
That's right. I forgot
And
about that.
looking really good. So there you go. Lots of very unique, smaller RPGs. I'm kind of excited about coming out of the direct.
Yeah.
And
And
there
I
you
had
go.
forgotten about those collections because I remember that that's a thing. Also, Advance Wars is finally coming out too. That's exciting.
Advance Wars, yeah. That is very exciting. So
Yeah.
another one in the books.
Yeah. In fact, I even pulled up my Nintendo Switch, circling card, Garrett, where I circled all the games green and yellow and crossed out the ones I wasn't going to play. And yeah, like a lot of the stuff there, like I'm going to play all that stuff. But it's just like the definitely the stuff with the green circles, just a lot of it aren't the RPGs. Because I'm mid about Batten Kaitos. I don't know if I'm going to play that collection or not.
I
Um,
don't know if I am either, to be honest with you. I just found it very weird. I was
yeah.
just like, really?
Yeah.
Like,
Etrian Odyssey's in that
it,
camp too for me too, where I'm like,
oh, okay.
I don't know if I go back to those games as well. Like I'm actually more excited for, something like the like Master Detective Rain Code, the new game from the Danganronpa creators. Like that detective game
That'll
looks
be
really cool.
interesting. Hmm.
Or like I'm actually really excited for Mega Man Battle Network, the collection to come out pretty soon. Because those are strategy RPGs that I've just never played, and I love Mega Man. So
Hmm.
it's
Well, there was another game from Level 5. It's called, what's it, Deca
oh
Dicer?
Deca Police.
Deca Police. That one looked pretty good, and
Yeah,
it's an RPG as well.
that's
So,
true. I forgot about that one, and I have it crossed off on my sheet for some reason. When that should be a yellow. There should be a yellow circle on that one.
mhm. it at least the gameplay trailer looked kind of cool. We'll see how the gameplay
Yeah,
actually is, but
yeah.
yeah,
And also too, I'm
very
excited for
interesting.
the Fire Emblem DLC later this year too. Like that's
Hmm.
on my list. Like we got the small editions during the direct, but like we'll see more of that. Just like the
Xenoblade
Xenoblade
Chronicles 3
Chronicles one.
expansion.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh, let me tell you, I think a lot of Xenoblade fans screamed when they saw Rex
Hmm.
and Shulk like in there. It's just I don't know. I think people are gonna freak out with that expansion.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Anyways, I think that's gonna do it for tonight's episode, Garrett. But before we go, Garrett, please go.
you can follow me on Twitter at Blind Explosion. You can also find me in the Discord over at the Carpool Gaming and play some video games. I'm around. I'm normally in the RPG Cave Discord reading the messages like all the time. So yeah, just
There are a lot of
come
those.
chat with me. Yeah, definitely.
A lot
So
of people tonight telling us that they don't like RPGs, so that happens from time to time too on
apparently,
the Discord, which is just funny. But as for me, You can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. I'm not going to do the whole bit today because it's been a long enough show. You can also find us on Twitter at Carpool Gaming, at youtube.com/Carpool Gaming, and on podcast services around the globe. So for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been the 83rd level of the RPG Cave. Only 16 more levels until level 99, and we're out.
Bye-bye.